Most people treat Monopoly as a chaotic party game where the dice decide everything, and the winner is whoever gets lucky at the right moment. But that belief is exactly why the same players tend to lose over and over again. Monopoly looks random on the surface, yet beneath that randomness is a game that rewards planning, probability awareness, timing, and psychological pressure. If you understand how the board actually functions, how money should flow, and how opponents tend to behave under stress, you can turn Monopoly from a gamble into a controlled system where you consistently end up with the advantage. Winning every time doesn't mean you'll never lose a game, but it does mean that over repeated plays, you will dominate far more often than anyone who relies on instinct or tradition. The key is abandoning common myths and replacing them with deliberate strategy from the very first roll. The opening phase of Monopoly is the most important part of the entire game, yet it's where most players make their biggest mistakes. As soon as the game begins, your primary goal is not to save money, not to wait for a specific color, and not to play conservatively. Your goal is ownership. Any unowned property you land on early should almost always be purchased. This isn't because early rent matters much, since small rents barely impact anyone's balance, but because every property you buy reduces the pool of opportunities available to your opponents. Each purchase increases your leverage for future trades and blocks other players from completing monopolies easily. Holding cash while passing up properties is effectively giving free chances to the table, and that generosity will come back to punish you later. The idea of waiting for better properties is one of the fastest ways to lose. Once properties start filling up, the game shifts from acquisition to consolidation, and this is where probability matters. Not all spaces on the board are equal. Players don't move evenly around the board, and certain areas get hit far more frequently due to how dice rolls interact with jail, card effects, and board layout. After jail, players are repeatedly pushed forward into the same clusters of properties, which create predictable landing patterns over time. Understanding this allows you to prioritize certain color groups, not because they look strong, but because players statistically land on them more often. Return on investment matters just as much as landing frequency. Some properties cost a lot to develop but don't punish opponents proportionally, while others deliver devastating rent relative to their price. Many players fixate on famous color groups because they've heard they're powerful, but blindly chasing the same sets, every game ignores the context of who you're playing with. If everyone at the table knows which properties are the best, those properties become expensive to acquire through trades, and overpaying for them can quietly ruin your position even if you complete the set. This is where adaptability becomes critical. Against inexperienced players, going directly for the most commonly landed on color groups works extremely well, because opponents don't value them properly and will trade them away cheaply. Against experienced players, however, those same color groups turn into bargaining chips rather than win conditions. In that environment, your strategy shifts from chasing one ideal monopoly to assembling flexible leverage across multiple sets. You buy high-demand properties when you land on them, but you don't emotionally commit to completing those sets. Instead, you hold them hostage. You force others to negotiate on your terms, while you quietly build strength elsewhere. This is where overlooked color groups become powerful. Sets that require low investment and are dismissed early often offer excellent profit once developed, especially because opponents don't fear them until it's too late. Completing these sets quietly allows you to start building houses earlier and apply pressure while others are still arguing over better properties. Railroads and utilities are another area where players consistently misjudge value. Railroads are powerful only when controlled in multiples, and owning all of them creates a steady, unavoidable drain on opponents. Partial railroad ownership is mediocre, but full control is oppressive. If you commit to railroads, commit fully, or use them strictly as leverage to block someone else from doing so. Utilities, on the other hand, are rarely worth heavy investment. The returns are inconsistent, dependent on dice rolls, and scale poorly compared to developed property monopolies. Money tied up in utilities is money not generating real pressure, and pressure is what wins Monopoly games. Development strategy is where games are actually decided. Houses are the engine of destruction in Monopoly, not hotels. The jump in rent from 2 to 3 houses is one of the most significant spikes in the game, and your objective should be to reach that point as quickly as possible on any completed Monopoly. 3 houses create fear. They force opponents to reroute cash defensively, and they create the kind of losses that destabilize balance sheets. Hotels, despite their dramatic appearance, are often a trap. The game has a limited number of houses, and holding them prevents others from upgrading their properties. By stopping at 3 houses on multiple properties, you restrict supply and quietly choke the table. Hotels only become worthwhile when you are actively attempting to eliminate players outright, not when you are trying to control the pace of the game. Timing construction is another overlooked weapon. You are allowed to build at any point, not just on your turn. This means you should watch opponent positions carefully. If someone is approaching your Monopoly with limited cash, that is the moment to build, even if it leaves you temporarily low on funds. Monopoly rewards aggression, backed by calculation, not safety. Mortgaging properties is also misunderstood. Many players treat mortgaging as failure, but it is simply a tool. Mortgaging a weak or undeveloped property to fund houses on a strong Monopoly is often the correct move. Cash flow matters more than asset appearance. A mortgaged property still blocks opponents from owning it, while houses actively extract money from them. Late game positioning is where disciplined players pull ahead. Once most properties are owned and developed, movement becomes dangerous. At this stage, jail transforms from punishment into protection. Staying in jail keeps you from landing on expensive properties while still allowing you to collect rent. The mistake many players make is rushing to get out of jail late in the game, exposing themselves to catastrophic losses. Early game jail avoidance makes sense because you need to acquire property, but late game jail patience preserves your advantage. Forcing rent payments in cash is another psychological and strategic edge. When opponents land on your properties, demand full payment. Do not accept partial trades or lenient deals unless they strongly benefit you. Forcing cash payments compels players to mortgage assets, sell houses, and weaken their future earning potential. This creates a downward spiral that is difficult to escape. Dice probability also plays a subtle but powerful role. Certain roll totals occur far more often than others, and knowing this allows you to predict danger zones on the board. Players frequently land a predictable distance from jail, and properties positioned accordingly become natural traps. While you cannot control dice outcomes, you can control which properties are positioned to benefit from those outcomes. Over time, this statistical pressure compounds. Monopoly games rarely end because someone makes one huge mistake. They end because one player quietly controls resources, restricts options, and applies pressure until opponents collapse under cumulative losses. Winning consistently requires resisting emotional decisions, ignoring popular myths, and playing the board rather than the table's expectations. When you treat Monopoly as a system instead of a guessing game, the randomness fades into the background, and what remains is a contest of planning, leverage, and timing. If you internalize these principles and apply them deliberately, you won't just win more often. You'll start noticing that games feel less chaotic and more predictable, and that when you know you are no longer playing Monopoly the same way everyone else is.